Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and thank you for joining me for today's exploration into Hy-Brasil, the Phantom Island of Ireland. Is it a myth or reality? What is the allure of Phantom Islands, and why do we have so many legends and myths of Phantom Islands? Are they real, or are they just something from our imagination, or something from poor cartography in the past and a vivid imagination of explorers who didn't exactly know what they were doing? Yet somehow they were able to find their way around the world and chart it accurately and enable us to discover all the lands that were not discovered before, so the mainstream says. What is Hy-Brasil, and what's the allure behind it? Many myths and legends persist about Hy-Brasil, that it's an island that can be seen from the western coast of Ireland once every 7 years and you just barely see it poking its way out of a fog. Your imagination runs wild as you wonder about the incredible creatures and remarkable adventures that could be had on such an island. What's its connection to the past, and how does it factor into our old world theories? Yet when we look at images of islands obscured in fog, we think back to our own memories and wonder if there is something in our collective memory that does ring true about these kind of islands. What's really the mystery behind Hy-Brasil? And what can we learn about ourselves by looking into it? We imagine what could actually be on the island, things that we couldn't even imagine before, creatures, flora and fauna, perhaps even a civilization. Hy-Brasil was said to be the Atlantis of Ireland. But what are the details behind this legend and myth? We go back to Mercator's map, and we recall that many of the lands didn't seem to be properly aligned, at least from what we understand from our modern understanding of how our realms or our lands look and are arrayed. But the other hand, they could be more accurate. And we have many islands that appear on Mercator's map. Many islands in many different places, some which were told, well, it was simply cartographic errors, Mercator didn't know what he was doing, the information that he got from the explorers was not validated and verified, they made mistakes, they didn't have proper navigation equipment, and so forth. However, when you look at this and you see that there are so many things that are accurate, you have to wonder if there's much more to the reality of the existence of these islands. We have many different maps depicting the location of Hy-Brasil just off to the west of Ireland, even in another Mercator map from 1623, and in other types of maps. It was seen and depicted in many different charts, and yet what brought about this observation of this island, and why is there this persisting myth that it can only be seen every 7 years and shrouded in fog? Is there more behind this? Does this connect to previous old world legends that we've explored with Ireland? Well, this is what we're going to explore in detail. Let's see what Irish Central can tell us about this amazing mythical island. Does a mythical island really exist off the coast of Ireland? Imagination merges with reality where the island of Hy-Brasil is remembered in both travelers' records and ancient Irish legends. Hy-Brasil is referenced in both explorers' logs and Celtic mythology, but is it real? Imagination merges with reality where the island of Hy-Brasil is remembered in both travelers' records and ancient Irish legends. Ireland could indeed have its own version of Atlantis. Information gathered by historian Fiona Brome, as well as Celtic mythological enthusiasts, shows the intersection of myth and reality in regards to the island of Hy-Brasil, which is also known by the variants of Hy-Brasil, 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 Brasil, among others. In Celtic folklore, this island country takes its name from Brasil, the High King of the world. An interesting connection, since we know for a fact that, according to the myths of Ireland, the King of the world, Daredon, attacked Ireland from the west. He rested for a while at Skellig Michael. But could this have been his gateway, or some sort of forward staging base, where he assembled his army? Why would this island have this name? Intriguing. However, as the Atlantic began to be more thoroughly explored, the name of Hy-Brasil may have been attached to a real place, providing some evidence that attached itself to the Irish myth. Hy-Brasil was noted on maps as early as 1325, when Genoese cartographer Darlato placed the island west of Ireland. On successive sailing charts, it appears southwest of Galway Bay. Both St. Berend and St. Brendan found the island on their respective voyages and returned home with nearly identical descriptions of Hy-Brasil, which they dubbed the Promised Land. A Catalan map of about 1480 labels an island as Ilha de Brasil to the southwest of Ireland, where the mythical place was supposed to be. Expeditions left Bristol in 1480 and 1481 to search for it, and a letter written shortly after the return of John Cabot from his expedition in 1497 reports that land found by Cabot had been discovered in the past by the men from Bristol who found Hy-Brasil. Some historians claim that the navigator Pedro Alvarez Cabral thought that he had reached this island in 1500, thus naming the country of Brazil. However, Cabral didn't choose the name Brazil. The country was at first named Ilha de Veracruz, Island of the True Cross, later Terra de Santa Cruz, Land of the Holy Cross, and still later, Brazil. The generally accepted theory states that it was renamed for the Brazil wood, which has an extreme red color, so Brazil derivated from Brasa ember, a plant very valuable in Portuguese commerce and abundant in the newfound land. The most distinctive geographical feature of Hy-Brasil is that it appears on the maps as a perfect circle, with a semicircular channel through the center. The central image of the Brazilian flag, a circle with a channel across the center, was the symbol for Hy-Brasil on early maps. The circular perimeter of the island was confirmed by both Saints Berend and Brendan, who separately walked the shore to determine where the island ended, but never found it. Most likely they were walking in circles. One of the most famous visits to Hy-Brasil was in 1674 by Captain John Nisbet of Kellybegs, County Donegal, Ireland. He and his crew were in familiar waters west of Ireland when a fog came up. As the fog lifted, the ship was dangerously close to rocks. While getting their bearings, the ship anchored in 3 fathoms of water, and 4 crew members rowed ashore to visit Hy-Brasil. They spent a day on the island and returned with silver and gold that was given to them by an old man who lived there. The last supposed sighting was in 1872 by Roderick O'Flaherty in a chronological description of West or H.I.R. Connaught. He tells us of the reported old man by saying, "There is now living Moro Ole, who imagines he was himself personally on Brazil for 2 days and saw out of it the lies of Aran, Golemhad, Irzohol, and other places in the West Continent he was acquainted with." The last documented sighting of Hy-Brasil was in 1872 when author T.J. Westrop and several companions saw the island appear and then vanish. This was Mr. Westrop's 3rd view of Hy-Brasil, but on this voyage he had brought his mother to some friends to verify the island's existence. Whether or not the island exists or ever existed, it's still hard to tell, but the mythical and real accounts of the island are hard to deny. Let's see what the mainstream has to tell us about this phenomena of ghost islands. And you can't get much more mainstream than National Geographic. Once considered a ghost, Bouvet Island was proven to exist 200 years after it was first spotted in 1739. Located 1,500 miles southwest of Africa, it is now a stop on some Antarctic cruises. Intriguing. And so they start this story, which they seem to be debunking these mythical ghost islands, by showing us that a ghost island was proven to be real. Naturally. These fabled ghost islands exist only in atlases. Well, except for Bouvet Island, of course. Early map makers and explorers covered the seas with mythical lands. Here's where to find ones that turned out to be real. From the dawn of cartography, ghosts haunted our maps until modern technology purged them like a scientific exorcism. Brilliant wording in this article. Due to myth, miscalculation, optical illusion, or outright lies, because nobody lies today, which is fortunate for us, hundreds of non-existent land masses were planted on maps, where some remained for centuries. Up until the past decade, these erroneous listings prompted many futile and occasionally deadly ocean voyages by crews seeking treasure, fame, or virgin territory. Hy-Brasil, supposedly located in the Atlantic Ocean west of Ireland, was said to render visitors immortal. Gamaland, east of Japan, drew sailors in search of its legendary gold and silver. The phantom Sannikov land in Siberia even managed to vanish part of a Russian expedition crew. Although such specters have all but erased from maps, travelers can trace these mysterious tales by visiting cartographic libraries, monuments to explorers and map makers, and ghost islands that prove to be real. So, quite an interesting series of contradictions here. I guess we shouldn't expect anything less from the mainstream. Yes, they were just idiotic people who were incompetent, fell victim to optical illusion, believed lies, and therefore many of them just ended up seeing things that weren't really there. Of course, we start the article by showing that one was proven to really be there. So it makes you wonder, and of course, it goes on to talk about the map making boom and everything else with it. I'll just cover this part claiming shadowy lands. These phantom islands spawned many problems for seafarers chasing these shadowy landmasses, according to Kevin Whitman, a researcher at Spain's Universidad de La Laguna, who completed his thesis on ancient maps. Oh, of course, thesis. This looks good. Those expeditions were expensive and in some cases dangerous. Yes, because people just apparently had money to throw around then. And finding out that they were sailing to a place that doesn't exist was not good, don't you think? In the early 1900s, German explorer Baron Eduard Vasilek Toll led a mission to Sannikov Land, first reported by a Russian ship in 1810, about 430 miles north of mainland Siberia. After Toll's vessel became trapped by ice in the new Siberian lands, he and several colleagues used sledges and kayaks to head for Bennett Island, which tourists can now see on Arctic Ocean pleasure cruises. These explorers disappeared, as did Sannikov Land, which likely was just a mirage caused by Fata Morgana, according to Brooke Hitching. So intriguing, and I really find it rich that they show a satellite image of Bouvet Island. I mean, look at how pristine that image is. And then, of course, some 1929 archival image from Bouvet Island. At least that looks a little bit more real, but who knows what's really going on there. I find it very intriguing, though, that again, there seems to be a lot of conflict in the mainstream account. They say that yes, these islands were just Phantom Islands, and now it's the end of Phantom Islands because we have modern technology and science has completed its exorcism of that which we didn't like in the past. Really brilliant wording, and actually quite accurate to describe what's happened. But you have to wonder, did science complete some sort of exorcism? Or if one were to have the ability to control what directions, what corridors, and what travel routes that all the people could take, then could one make an account where they could dictate what lands are real and what lands are not? Or is that merely just a conspiracy theory? Not sure, but I think it's safe to say, though, that this does not in any way debunk the potential presence of more Phantom Islands and lands that are no doubt kept secret from our awareness. Well, let's head to our favorite Google Maps to take a look at this. Yes, I love these wonderful, very photorealistic satellite images that we have. However, we see Ireland and we recall the earlier explorations that we did to Skellig Islands, located here. And then we also remember how that played a role into the Battle of Ventry, which is where the King of the World rested for a while before he advanced his army, meeting the armies of the Fianna and the Tuatha De Danann in the Battle of Ventry. However, you have to wonder if Hy-Brasil was located somewhere around here. Would it have been possible that this was some sort of gateway or some sort of interdimensional portal, or perhaps there's a facet to the lands that we don't understand? Maybe this would explain why we have these Phantom Islands, why we have access, why there's so many real accounts of these lands appearing and then disappearing. Maybe there is something more to the reality behind it. Also, the name, which evokes High King of the World, means potentially that maybe this was a forward staging base, Hy-Brasil, for the King of the World Daredon before making his final advance to engage the armies of the Fianna and the Tuatha De Danann in his attempt to conquer Ireland. How does it all fit together? We have so many accounts of the actual existence of Hy-Brasil and its location west of Ireland. We know that it could have been a perfect staging point for any sort of army or expeditionary force coming from the west, which is one of the most interesting aspects of the legend of Fionn McCool's battle with the King of the World Daredon. But could there be other meanings behind it? The myth indicates that this is a mythical land and that it's a place where there's unbelievable prosperity and beauty beyond imagination. But we have to wonder, is reality somewhere in between? And what is the real nature of this island? Of course, the mainstream will dismiss it and tell us that it doesn't exist, and for all we know, they could be right. But there are too many accounts to ignore once again. We know that in Irish legend and myth, there seems to be a great deal of suppression that occurs, which is why it's very difficult sometimes to catalog Irish myth. And yet at the same time, there seem to be a lot of references to things that make sense and add up over the timelines, especially when you consider the fact that when the Tuatha De Danann were defeated, they were defeated by a people who had come from the fall of the Tower of Babel. So it all factors into legend and myth and our accounts of what we understand as a different kind of history, perhaps a kind of history that we could trust a little bit more. Because we do know for a fact that there have been many issues with the mainstream account, which contradicts itself in an opening paragraph. However, I do wonder, going back to Tolkien's world in Arda, as he called it, he had many different physical existences for it. One was a flat world, or really more of a disk world in the Second Age. It had transitioned to a round world in the Third Age. And the only way that the elves could reach Valinor, the Undying Lands, was by sailing the Straight Road. And yet, is it really so extraordinary to think that there could be a realm or certain lands that potentially could be in some other dimension? That there has to be some other means of reaching instead of just simply physically going there? Perhaps it's some sort of technology we don't fully understand, or perhaps it's a mix of forces and technology that we don't fully understand. But who knows what our ancestors were truly capable of? It's intriguing to me that the mainstream likes to downplay our ancestors as being fools when it came to mapping the world. But then at the same time, they were able to achieve all these monumental architectural achievements in a century, the 19th century, when they didn't supposedly have many capabilities. It just seems to be convenient to whatever needs to fit the story being told, which is why we have to continuously question it. And yet I also wonder, could Hy-Brasil have also been one of the lands that the Tuatha De Danann had inhabited or moved through when they moved from the four cities coming back to Ireland? There was a story that they had burned their ships when they reached Ireland, although there's even more what will be told are fantastical stories that they flew to Ireland on some sort of airships. Again, we see this continuous legend that gets blended into what could be reality because we see people who are witnessing technology that they might not fully understand. What if that's really the case for the existence of Hy-Brasil? And then we go back to the Battle of Ventry, which the more we look into the myth and the more we look into other myths, it seems to be an event that may have truly happened. It's often said that the Irish saved civilization. But is that really what happened? And of course, that's stated because they preserved knowledge that was going to be lost during the medieval period or the Dark Ages. And yes, you've read the book, and I've read the book, and no, it was kind of a dry read. That's just my opinion on it. But I always thought there was a lot more to that saying. Perhaps the Battle of Ventry had a lot more at stake than we realize. What would have been different for our realm if Daredon had defeated Fionn McCool and conquered Ireland, the last free land in the world? Something we're going to speculate on, and there'll be an upcoming video concerning the Battle of Ventry. Where does that leave us with Hy-Brasil? Is it just a legend or a myth? Is it something that's simply in the fairy tale imagination of many people in the history of Ireland? Or is there a reality to it? There are too many accounts once again to ignore, and I find it interesting that in the 19th century that always seems to be a cutoff period for where we had accounts, and then all of a sudden the magical science of the 20th century suddenly validated or invalidated many of these so-called phantom islands. But I leave it to you, the viewer, to make your own decision on what you think the reality of Hy-Brasil is. And I certainly invite you to let me know in the comments what you think it is. Well, as always, ask questions, explore yourself, and you'll restore the world. Thank you for joining me today. Please like, comment, and subscribe.